Salahuddin Yusuf ibn Ayyub. Despite his famous role in the Crusades, when Salahuddin faced the leper king at the Battle of Montgisard in 1177, he hadn't been king for long. Today, we will cover the epic Battle of the Horns of Hama 2 years prior to Montgisard, after which Salahuddin crowned himself Sultan of Egypt and Syria. Salahuddin was born into a family of Kurdish mercenaries led by his uncle Asad ad-Din Shirkuh. At the time, Syria was governed by Nur ad-Din, the Zengid Atabegate of Syria, who was a vassal of the vast Seljuk Empire. Shirkuh happened to be the Atabeg's main commander, and both him and Nur ad-Din were great mentors to the young Salahuddin. For years, Shirkuh fought countless wars for Nur ad-Din against Byzantines, Crusaders, and Muslim rulers alike. During these campaigns, Salahuddin accompanied his uncle, learning how to command men in battle as well as a fair share of politics. In 1169, Shirkuh conquered Egypt for Nur ad-Din and was appointed its governor by the Zengid Atabegate. However, Shirkuh passed away soon after and was succeeded by Salahuddin. The newly appointed governor strengthened his hold on Egypt, while his relationship to Nur ad-Din deteriorated. Despite the fact that the Zengid Atabegate's commands went against Salahuddin's own wishes on several occasions, the Kurdish governor remained faithful to the Atabeg, defending his territory from invaders and generally obeying his orders. 5 years later, in 1174, Nur ad-Din finally passed away, leaving an 11-year-old as his successor and throwing the Atabegate of Syria into a period of instability. Instead of acting as a united province, the cities of Syria were now left to fend for themselves against each other. The governors of the cities of Mosul and Aleppo, both cousins and members of the Zengid Dynasty, marched to war against the governor of Damascus, who called Salahuddin for help. The Kurdish leader remained in Egypt at the time, but he gathered a 10,000-strong army and answered the call. When Salahuddin arrived at Damascus, Syria seemed to be divided in two factions: the Ayyubids, led by himself, and the Zengids, led by the rulers of Mosul and Aleppo. Damascus, Aleppo and Mosul were the three most important cities in Syria, and two were in control of the enemy. Salahuddin reinforced the garrison at Damascus, and once he made sure the city was properly defended, he marched towards Aleppo. The city of Aleppo was held by the Zengids and was also where Nur ad-Din's 11-year-old son had taken refuge. If Salahuddin captured the city, he would be tilting the balance of power in his favor. Therefore, he began preparations for a siege. While a part of his force remained at Aleppo, Salahuddin paid a visit to other neutral cities who either joined him via diplomatic actions or were subjugated by force. The city of Homs was one of the latter. the defenders clawed onto the citadel, putting up a fierce resistance. In spite of this, Saladin's forces eventually occupied Homs as well. 3 entire months went by, and despite the inability of the Ayyubids to take Aleppo, they kept amassing victories. Finally, in April, the Zengid ruler of Mosul managed to gather a large army and march to the aid of his cousin. Aware that this army, coupled with the defenders of Aleppo, would outnumber his forces 2 to 1, Saladin lifted the siege and retreated to Hammah, where he would pick the site of the battle very carefully. The 13th of April of 1175, the Zengid army that was chasing Saladin arrived at Hammah. This host was composed by the relief forces from Mosul and the defenders of Aleppo, and they amounted to a total of around 20,000 men. In front of them, atop a hill, stood the Ayyubid army of Saladin Yusuf ibn Ayyub. With great cunning, the Kurdish leader had situated his forces on the Horns of Hama, an elevated terrain close to the river Orontes. This river protected one of the sides of the Ayyubid formation from any flanking attacks and would also hinder a retreat for the enemy. Saladin had granted his uncle's son, Muhammad ibn Shirkuh, the command of the vanguard, while he remained in the rear, surrounded by his most experienced Egyptian forces. In total, the Ayyubid forces amounted to 10,000 men, with the enemy doubling his numbers. The Battle of the Horns of Hama, which would decide if Syria was to be ruled by the Zengids or by the Ayyubids, was about to begin. The numerical superiority granted the Zengid leadership the confidence to open the day. Therefore, their entire front line, composed of the troops from Mosul, advanced uphill. Along the front line, both forces met each other on the steep hill, and a fierce melee ensued. The steepness of the terrain granted the Ayyubids a significant advantage, and their line held fairly well. However, the Zengid leadership decided to make use of their numerical advantage and launched a second wave on the hard-pressed Ayyubids. Saladin's men fought fiercely, but the tide of attackers began pushing back their line. The left flank of the Ayyubid army was the most hard-pressed, and where the killing was the thickest. Eventually, after putting up a fierce resistance, Saladin's left flank broke ranks. A tide of Zengid infantrymen swarmed through the breach. and disaster seemed inevitable for the Ayyubids. However, Saladin still had a trick up his sleeve. The enemy had committed the entirety of their forces to the assault, while the Ayyubids still held a fresh rearguard of veterans from Shirkuh's campaigns. As the Zengids poured in, Saladin commanded a fraction of the rearguard to contain the enemy, while the rest, as well as himself, moved towards the left in an enveloping maneuver. As Saladin's personal guard, composed of members of his family and experienced Mamluk warriors, charged into the flank of the Zengids, his strategy was complete. Though outnumbered, he had drawn the enemy in and surrounded them with his reserve troops. Chaos ensued with the maneuver of the Ayyubids. Their retreat was cut off by the river Orontes, so when a general rout was triggered, the Zengid forces fled the field with no semblance of order or cohesion. Under attack from various sides, the Zengids were cut down left and right. By the end of the day, Saladin was victorious. The Zengids had no means to oppose his authority, and almost the entirety of Syria, except for Aleppo, Mosul and a few others, were now under his rule. He declared himself king, and the Abbasid Caliphate of Baghdad recognized his authority, naming him Sultan of Egypt and Syria. On the following months, Saladin subdued the rest of the region, effectively eliminating any who challenged his power. Before the conflict, he was a subject of the Zengid Atabegate and held Egypt on his behalf. Now, he was the Sultan of Syria, ruling over those who were his masters and independent from the Seljuk Empire. The conquest of Syria by Saladin marked the beginning of the Ayyubid Dynasty, which would last several generations. After this great achievement, the Sultan would concentrate all his efforts in reconquering Jerusalem from the Crusaders, and 2 years later, he faced King Baldwin IV at the Battle of Montgisart. If you stayed until the end and enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to my small channel for weekly Total War documentaries. I script, record and narrate everything by my own means, so if you could leave a like and comment as a form of support, I would be immensely grateful. Thank you for watching and have a good day.